Good morning, Toastmasters. Good morning, rock and rollers. I'm going to begin today's speech with a quick question for you. And that is, where is this piece of artwork from? Betty, do you know? Very good. Yes, this is the cover to David Bowie, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. This album is the piece of artwork that I most pay attention to. I started listening to this well over 40 years ago. I've played the vinyl album at least 400 times. Since Spotify came on, I've listened to at least 10,000 tracks off of this album. It's been extremely important to me. But where did the Ziggy Stardust personality come from? And is this album indeed a concept album, as it's often called? Let's take a look first at Ziggy Stardust. For about 18 months, David Bowie, whose real name is David Jones, would only refer to himself as Ziggy Stardust. He went on the Dick Cavett show, the BBC, Wolfman Jack, other DJs in America or in England. He would be introduced, he would be dressed, he would be in character as Ziggy Stardust the entire time. But where did this come from? Number one, this personality came from inside David himself. And this was a bit of a change. Let's take a look at early David Bowie albums before Ziggy Stardust. This is what he looked like. And believe it or not, the bald fat fuck sitting before you right now had more than a little bit of a striking resemblance to David Bowie 40 plus years ago. And of course, when we're covering this time period, we cannot forget the man dress. David would appear in album covers and even in concerts in his quote unquote man dress. This created quite a stir when he toured in Texas. They rushed the audience with they rushed the stage with live guns. Good old Texas. Another source where maybe Ziggy Stardust came from, and I never heard of this until I started researching 3 weeks ago, was perhaps he's based on Paul McCartney. Ziggy Stardust is a colorful, red-haired transvestite alien with a message to deliver. Paul McCartney is a Beatle. At first, I didn't really catch the connection. But if you look at some of the similarities, Beatles, Spiders, he played it left hand. Paul McCartney is somewhat famous for being one of the few left-handed guitarists in the early days of rock and roll. He played it left hand, but made it too far, became the special man. This album came out at a time period when the Beatles were one of the top news stories, especially in the music and entertainment field. And in front of us all, we could see the friendship between Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and the other Beatles dissolving. One manager had passed away. Paul McCartney had kind of taken over the group. He had a far bigger influence on the later albums of the band than he did in the earlier ones. And this created quite a lot of friction that was covered a lot in the entertainment news. So perhaps Ziggy Stardust was thinking of these characters when he invented his own Ziggy Stardust. Or how about the phrase, like a leper messiah? This could suggest this was Iggy Pop. Iggy was always my choice of where Ziggy Stardust came from. I mean, notice the alliteration, Iggy, Ziggy. You can see Ziggy Pop on the left publicizing his Lust for Life album record. One of his very few hits. He also wrote China Girl with David Bowie. Other than that, he hasn't had a lot, except for the eccentric people that are fans of his band. But you can see him on the left when he started out. He was a guy that wasn't going to get a date to the prom, let's put it that way. On the right, you can see him there as some kind of whacked out individual. Take another look at him. On the left, you can see Iggy Pop and David Bowie in their partying, young man partying days. There's probably enough pharmaceuticals in their bloodstream to take care of 2 or 3 hospitals. On the right, you see the later stages of Iggy Pop's performances. He does look kind of like a crazed lost Messiah figure. And you may or may not want to look carefully at his abdomen. You can see it's all cut up. In the earlier days of his performances, like a wrestler, he used to take ground glass and cut himself so that he would bleed during the performance. Why this made it any better or different, I don't know. It was the 70s. Where else could the Ziggy Stardust personality have come from? It actually came from Vince Taylor. Vince Taylor was a singer, the Wild Lifestyle, but his problems with alcohol and drugs led to the band being disbanded. Then he joined a religious movement. What the article doesn't say, but he will put further on, he decided when he joined this religious movement that he was indeed a Messiah sent down from God to deliver a message to earth. This was Vince Taylor. This was the strongest influence on David Bowie, who did go to his performances, did meet him in the late 60s and early 70s. And most of the information I've gotten so far from the article, not all of it, has been from an article written by Jem Aswad for Variety magazine. Jem is the music editor for Variety magazine. And for 50 years now, I was convinced that Ziggy Stardust was a concept album. Now, what is a concept album? Concept album is an album that from first to last, it's telling a single story in the album. Usually the music also ties together with the concept. One song logically leads to another. There's themes, there's musical devices all tied in together. Some of the better well-known concept albums are shown on the left is The Who's Tommy, about a young man emotionally abused by his family who does not find his way and have a way to deliver his message until he meets Elton John. And on the right is another concept album by The Who called Quadrophenia, which is about a well overdressed young man who can't decide what to do with his life until he meets Sting. Another concept album, the aforementioned Beatles, here's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And as you can see in the album cover, the Beatles from She Loves You and Yeah, 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 they're just in the background. This is indicating that this will be a different look, a different image, a different style for the Beatles. This is very much a concept album. One song leads into another. I used to be very good friends with an editor of a music newspaper. Unfortunately, my big mouth said something that offended him. I no longer have that resource to refer to, but I do know that music editors think this is one of the best albums of all time. The way it is so tightly written, the way one song, one verse just always leads into another. And it's all just about an alternative version of the Beatles, not their old stuff. It's now all new music, drawing influences from all different eras. On the right is the cover to Alan Parsons' I, Robot. This album, the concept is what if mankind got over reliant on technology and led to his downfall. Many of Alan Parsons' albums are concept albums. He has an album dedicated to the dangers of gambling, industrial poisoning, and many other. And of course, the works of Edgar Allan Poe in his album Tales of Mystery and Imagination. But is Ziggy Stardust a concept album? Does one song lead to another? Is there sort of a common music theme flowing throughout the album? Is there? No, there is not. This is just something I decided one day. Many of my peers did too. Oh no, this is a concept album. Partly we were misled by the title, which says The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust. You thought there was going to be an adventure or a tale to be told in this. Not really. Not. It's definitely not a concept album. So for years, I believe this was the centerpiece. This was my favorite album. For years, I believed a whole lot of wrong things about this album. I've also noticed in my life, I've thought a lot of wrong things about people. For instance, I used to believe Mexican women made excellent mothers. They made excellent mothers when they were 15 years old. I used to think my Chinese neighbors would push and push and push their kids in mathematics and computer science, excel in math and computer science, so that you can grow up to sell state secrets. And I was convinced if you ever had an event or a wedding or a large gathering, never, never, never let the white O face on the dance floor, or they just ruin the day. All these were terrible ideas. It took me a lot of growth, a lot of self reflection to flush that out and admit that a lot of things that I learned or thought I learned when I was in high school or even younger were extremely poor ideas. And Toastmaster, I say the same thing to you. Go back over your thoughts. Think about things you're thinking about. Think about things you're saying. Are these genuine truths or just something you're sticking to because you always did it that way? Change yourself, make yourself better. You'll be very happy you did. Thank you, Toastmasters.